Welcome to 52 Miniatures. In this video I'm going to be painting a tiny car from an old 1988 Games Workshop game called Dark Future. A gentleman called Marcel, who runs the YouTube channel SciFiWargaming, got a game called Dark Future. It's basically like it's a vehicle-based game. You've got cars, and I think there might even be motorbikes and, stuff like that. But there was 4 cars in this box, and Marcel was kind enough to send them out to some different YouTube mini painter folk like myself to paint one of the cars. There's also a bit of a challenge involved. I don't get to paint this car just any way I want. I'm supposed to paint it inspired by the SciFiWargaming logo. And the other folks who are involved, which is Leif, who runs a channel called Devs and Dice. He gets to paint his car inspired by Jamie, who is the 4th person involved, who runs a channel called Mini-Apocalypse. And Jamie, he gets to paint his inspired by my, the round logo. It says 52 miniatures and it's like a color chart kind of a thing. So in the end, I've got a tiny car, and it's supposed to be SciFiWargaming inspired. But let's start with the game Dark Future, because I was pretty stoked about this whole thing. I thought, like, just wait. Hey Siri, play a song called Dark Future.
Now playing Dark Future.
Dark Future is a 1988 alternate history and post-apocalyptic science fantasy miniature wargame by Games Workshop. It is set in the then future year of 1995, later updating the setting to 2021, in a post-apocalyptic fantasy-inspired alternate reality where the United States as well as the rest of the world has fallen apart. Society has collapsed almost back to the time of both the Dark Ages and the Wild West, where there's no law and no order, and the natural laws of physics have broken down. Megacorps are now in total control, technology runs rampant, and sanctioned op patrols the roads and highways, tracking down and destroying the renegade scum who live there, outside the law, and doing what they please. So there you go. In my mind, I was thinking like Mad Max, kind of, from what I just read about the game, I thought that, it's going to be a fun car to paint. And then to me was sent this little package over from SciFiWargaming, and I got this little package and I opened it and I looked at the car and I was like, but this is like a crappy looking 1980s Lamborghini. Where's the Dark Future? Kind of a thing. It's a really ugly car, I think. But there you go. There was a perk to this challenge, which is we could pretty much do anything we wanted with the car.
There are no rules regarding modifications, kit bashing, or converting, or even painting, as long as the channel's livery is clear to all.
And so my first thoughts were, I'm going to have to kit bash this into something more sci-fi, because I'm not thinking just just not the color scheme should be SciFiWargaming inspired. Like the whole thing should be sort of sci-fi. The car should be sci-fi. And then, so kit bashing, yeah. And then also I was like, well, I could just, as always, not stop when I should stop, and maybe make a little diorama for the car. I remembered that in the basement I had a Panzerkampfwagen number 4. My neighbor taught me that apparently if there's, wait, let's see, this is 8 small wheels. If it's 7, it's Panzerkampfwagen number 3. But anyway, I had this kit I've had this kit for ages. I've never built this kit. It was given to me as a present like 10 years ago or something like that, and it's just been in the basement. And these kits, these scale model kits, this is like where kit bashing comes from. Don't quote me on that, but like in old movies and stuff, like Star Wars, when they were building like all the space vehicles and Death Stars and everything, they pretty much built some of it, but they took a lot of stuff from these kind of kits. And a box like this, it contains so much plastic, and just everything is, you know, it's got bolts, it's like metal sheets. It's just a wealth of bits. And so I looked through this and just checked what I could put where on my little white Lamborghini to make it look less like a white Lamborghini. And like I even found these tiny little things to put in the wheels to make the, you know, so it looks like they've got whatever they're called in English, don't know, the thing you have on wheels. So there's yeah, so much great stuff. And I was just like, I'm thinking sci-fi. There should be wings, bigger engine, exhausts, and I'm covering up like, because frankly, if you know, Mr. SciFiWargaming wants to actually play the game with this car, then he's just going to get the gun on the turret up top, and I'm covering all the other holes with bits and pieces, because I can't really stand having holes in my car, and you know, but there you go. One really cool thing is that in this kit as well, there's like there are these metal sort of brass type bits that are actually bendable. So I could put a net on the inside of where there should have been a tacky looking glass, and also like, yeah, well, you can see what it looks like. And like in the end, I think I managed to kind of make a semi sci-fi looking kind of a Batmobile. Probably just because there's just the one seat in the middle. That's probably what makes it look like the old Batmobile. But I'm getting some strong sort of Batmobile vibes from this, which is, you know, that'll do. I mean, I couldn't just only do the car. I had to do something more. And like in the picture in my mind, I could just see it on like a strip of road in the desert, and just to put it in some kind of situation that made it more sound like a dark future than the white Lamborghini. And my first thought was like, well, if I should start, if I'm going to make a diorama, it should have a frame. I actually went to a couple of like op shops, whatever you call them, to see if I could find some like cheap wooden frames and stuff. But it's also sort of pandemic kind of style, so I didn't really want to go to all that many places, and I couldn't find one. So in the end, I got a really cheap aluminium picture frame. Like you're supposed to put the picture of your beloved one, or from that awesome vacation, or you know, that time when you met that really famous person in it. But I threw all the inside out and just kept the frame. It's black, and so black painted aluminium. I figured I could sort of scrape it a bit and make it look kind of nice. But I thought that was the best start, to have like a frame for the diorama. And the rest of, you know, what is this? Well, they're supposed to be on a highway. There's supposed to be a road. With the diorama, you want depth in like altitudes, latitudes, ups and downs. So it's more kind of a mountain kind of a thing. Also kind of desert, and maybe some kind of water feature. Because that's, you know, dioramas usually have water features. And I've never made a diorama, so I reckon like I should put a water feature in there. I cut out some foam core out of the core of the foam, just to make sort of a bit of an elevation for where the road was going to be. And then for the hill, I figured cork bark, because cork bark is awesome. If you haven't tried using cork bark for like bases or dioramas or anything like that, you should try. Basically, it looks like hills and cliffs, and all you have to do is like break pieces off or cut them with a saw or a knife and just place them in any sort of random way that looks nice, and that's pretty much all you have to do to it, and it just really looks like rocks, especially on this scale. Like everything is really tiny here, so I'm trying to be sort of a bit more attentive to scale so that things don't look really off, and cork bark really has so much fine detail that it's a lot better than anything I could sculpt that would look like a cliff, you know. Obviously I needed somewhere to pour the water, and so I cut out a hole in the first layer of foam core, and then used that as sort of, you know, I could draw the lines with a pencil to see where in the piece of foam core that goes underneath, where I could sort of try and scoop out a little bit of that as well. I'm thinking like there's a hill, and then there should be some kind of sewage, kind of a pipe coming out of some kind of concrete thingy, because that sounds kind of dystopian and futuristic, at least in my book, sort of in the desert, in the, sort of toxic goo coming out. And anyway, I'm getting carried away. So for the concrete, I used a small piece of XPS foam and just tried to make it look a little bit sort of jagged in the edges, and like made some lines as if it would have been sort of concrete molds and things like that. And then I just stuck a piece of, I think, Panzerkampfwagen number 4 as exhaust pipe in there as my sewage pipe. Like I'm using different glues here. Sometimes hot glue for speed, like with the cork bark, it's fine to glue with a hot glue. But with something like the XPS foam, I actually use white glue because I didn't want sort of the hot glue to melt the plastic. So I'm using both. But then I added more cork bark to sort of incorporate the concrete feature. And then I just started filling up with green stuff. Green stuff is basically an epoxy putty. If you don't know about it, it comes in a strip, one sort of yellowish green and the other one's blue. And you take equal amounts of each part and you sort of mix it together well with your fingers, and after a while this sort of goo will harden. It's important to make sure you have equal amounts and that you mix it well, otherwise it won't harden. But I used it to fill up the inside of the hill, and also evening out here and there on the entire build where there was, you know, where things needed to be evened out. Now, when you're working with green stuff, it can sort of stick to your fingers. So one thing you can use is sort of some kind of shaping tool, preferably made out of silicone, because that won't stick. You can also just use baking tray paper and put it on your finger, and then it won't stick. And something I like to do, because this will in the end be covered by more things, but I don't want there to be a chance of something smooth showing up underneath. So I just use an old toothbrush and just go at it so that it sort of looks like a bit of a rocky, sandy kind of a texture. Now, I don't know if you've been thinking, but I've been thinking that, you know, what if Maurice wants to actually play the game and I stick his car on a diorama? Like, it'll be pretty tricky driving the diorama around. So my natural thought was things are going to I'm going to have to magnetize things, magnetize the car to, you know, where the road's going to be, so that it can stick to the diorama and you can have it on your shelf and go like, wow, look at what he did. Yeah, it's lovely. Or you can just take it off and you can play your little game with it. So I got some tiny magnets, made sure that they were on the right sort of polar ends, were not unpolarizing, and glued one, made a hole in where the road's going to be, put one there and just glued the other one to the car, and voila, magnetized car. After that, I actually put some Mod Podge. You could probably just do white glue if you haven't got Mod Podge. But anyway, I put it where the water feature is going to be, just to make sure that it's just sealed tight, so that none of the whatever I'm going to use for the water feature will pour out anywhere and just make a mess. I've never before used specific miniature made texture goos, or you know, you can, yeah. I always just use sand and then sort of baking powder and super glue and these kind of things. And this time around I thought, you know, I'm just going to try some of these texture thingies. So I got these, which are from Soilworks, which is basically a company called Scale 75 that makes paints that I really enjoy, make these pastes. That there's a full range of them. And I figured, you know, I want to try them. So I got one called Summer Ground, which is basically sort of a sandy type texture for, you know, the desert. And then I got one called Medium. There's like fine, medium, and heavy, I think. And I thought that might be able, you know, I'll just try for the actual road. Like it's supposed to be asphalt. Do you say asphalt? My fault, your fault, asphalt? But what I did was I tried to make one layer as smooth as possible. I used like an old ice cream or coffee stirrer kind of a stick with some water on it, really trying to sort of level it out. Waited for everything to dry. Then I put 2 pieces of tape down, because basically most roads, at least out in the countryside or whatever, I mean, they put the asphalt like on the ground, so it sticks up. So I needed to be elevated from the rest. So I put out 2 strips of tape on the edges, tried to get a pretty thick layer of this on, and like before it dried, I pulled the tape away, you know, pretty much instantaneously once I had that really smooth, leveled off surface. And I got a pretty nice sort of road. All I had to do was like roughen the edges a little bit. Now, once this had dried, I was actually pretty pleased with it. I mean, it was just, I just randomly picked this one, hoping that it would look like a road when it was done. And it actually kind of fit in scale as well. Like, that's the important thing. It's sort of a bit rough, right enough, kind of a rough. There's some small cracks here and there and stuff like that. So it turned out nice. And then it was just a matter of adding the last details and just putting it all together. Like, I put some more things on that, I was going to say outhouse, I guess, with the sewage coming out. But the concrete thing, there's a little ventilation pipe and stuff like that. Put some junk in where the water feature is going to be. And I put it like in the foreground. It was a bit empty in the foreground of the diorama. I first thought, you know, should there be like a sign or something? And then I thought, well, no, because this is going to have to get shipped back to wherever it came from. I was still thinking in the sci-fi vibe. So I put a robot's leg in there. It's the old Necron warriors. I had some of them lying around. So I put a leg in there. So it's you know, we're in the future of 1995. Or depending on, you know, what release, it could also be the future of 2001. And so I figured a big hunking old robot's leg really should be in there, you know. And then the car was done and the diorama was done, and then it was time to prime everything. And I went in for zenithal priming, and I actually did it with my airbrush. And I didn't film it, but a zenithal prime is basically you prime it with a black primer, and then you dust with a white from up top, and sort of at a 45-degree angle. I made a video about zenithal priming, which you could check out if you want to know more about it and why you should or shouldn't be zenithal priming. What I did differently here, on the diorama, I did it black first, and then I used a gray, a sort of a lighter gray, that I dusted the whole thing, because I didn't want to bump up the light all that much on the road. So I gave it all a good dust with the gray, and then after that I went in with a white on the sides of the road and on the hill and stuff like that, just to make them pop a little bit more, but leaving the road a little bit more gray. And in a way I did the same thing with the car. But let's start with because now we're supposed to be talking about color themes inspired by sci-fi wargamers. Like this is the logo. And so it's pink. In my mind, I've got pink to work with. But I didn't really just want to make a pink car. I actually wanted to make a white car because white, in my mind, white is like sci-fi. Either it's like Mad Max, kind of just everything, the whole world's ruined and you built everything out of old dumpsters, or it's like white in 2001-ish kind of a thing. And so I wanted white. White's more sci-fi than pink in my mind. So white and then maybe pink details. So it's going to be white and pink. White's not the most enjoyable color in the world to paint. So I figured I'll try and do the white with like a zenithal prime and then not have to paint on all that much white with a brush. But what I did is I primed it black, and then I used that gray as well and covered pretty much all of it, a light gray. It's called necron. It's kind of warm, scale 75. And covered pretty much everything with it, but still sort of leaving a thin gradient, because when you use an airbrush, the paint's so thin that, you know, even if you just keep on going, that black sort of shines through. So I get a depth in there. And then on top of that, I went in with the white, but I really diluted it heavily with flow improver. So it almost sort of poured down over the car. Because here's the thing that I've sort of, in my mind with I don't know, sort of cars and stuff like that, it's usually, it was white, and then sort of the absolute tops that are sticking out in some places, that's sort of a bit dirty and worn down, but in the cracks, it's still sort of white from the original paint job. And that was sort of a little bit what I was after. So I wanted this paint to actually go in a little bit into some of the recesses on the details, not sort of further down on the car where I still wanted the shadow. So I was kind of working this pretty intensively. And in the end, I got a pretty decent, not full on white, because here's the thing with white, like what are you going to highlight white with if you airbrush too much white on there, or rattle can too much white on there, and it's white, you know, what are you going to highlight that with? White? Do you have a white? You probably don't. So I did still want it to leave in the sort of bright gray area, so I can go in and highlight it a little bit with the brush using a white, because I don't have a white. And then the pink details. I was thinking sci-fi pink, like a neon, really bright pink, and I didn't have one. And so while I was getting these things in the game store, I was also looking for a very bright pink, and it was sort of, I think they were about to get deliveries, but I hadn't got them yet, so it's sort of a little bit picked out. And the really brightest pink I could find was this one, which is from a brand range called Mecha, made by Vallejo. And these are supposed to go, it says, somewhere around here, that they're supposed to go in the airbrush. They're especially designed to go in the airbrush, and they're also sort of supposed to get a really hard surface, and you're supposed to paint your robots with them or something. I don't really know. And I thought, well, yeah, how big can the difference be? Sure, they're designed for airbrush, but I can just paint them on with my brush. Yeah. So I tried to paint pink onto the white, which, you know, there should be a decent amount of, it's not like I'm trying to paint it on black, I'm trying to paint it on, but, you know, it was I don't know how many layers of this pink I had to paint on with my brush, but I'm thinking 5 or 6 layers to get a really blotchy result. Like, I was not getting an even nice, fine pink surface. But these things happen. After the pink, not very smooth details, I went in with the black ink. It's called Intensity, I think, the range from scale 75. And sort of, I added some, you do the dishes, usually you have some kind of detergent. It's usually green. Sometimes it smells like lemon, sometimes it doesn't. I take like a drop of that in a little bit of water and have it next to me when I paint. And then if I put some paint in my wet palette, by the way, if you're not using a wet palette, please check out the wet palette world and please start using one because it makes life great. I take a little bit of that watered down, washing up liquid stuff and put in a paint, in this case in the ink. What that does is it breaks up all sort of surface tension things going. It'll just sort of kind of flow here and there, but you can also kind of paint with it sometimes a little bit easier. Sometimes it flows everywhere and sometimes you can actually paint with it instead of just sort of rubbing it around and nothing happens. Anyway, I've been trying this out lately and it's kind of great for very liquidy things that you just want to sort of stain stuff with. And so I started adding that to anything on here that I didn't want pink. So it's the gun and it's some other details. It's the inside of the car. It's the wheels, the road. One of the reasons why I didn't want to highlight the road too much is because with the zenithal priming, I want that to shine through. I'm just using this ink to tone it down, but it's still got a bit of a depth to it. And then I had this picture in my head because I put these really big exhaust kind of things, might even be like jet engines or something on the back there. There's this sort of kind of based on reality, but then becomes theatrical in our world of sort of exhausts that get really, really hot. So you get like these colors in the metal. They're like blue and then purple and then almost like a rainbow kind of thing. You sometimes see them on like futuristic guns and stuff. I thought, I should do that. That's going to be awesome. The thing is, I think I was talking to my son at the same time while I was doing it, and I wasn't paying attention to where the camera was, so I didn't really film it. What I was doing is I used some inks, watered down inks, again with the dishwasher detergent kind of a thing in them, trying to do a wet blend from like a blue to a purple to a orange to a yellow kind of a thing. And I've done this once before and I did it on a metallic and that turned out really nice. I was now doing it on sort of a white and it didn't really turn out great. And also I think I should have been using more of actually sort of like a flow, like a medium, like a contrast medium or something like that, to be able to wet blend these inks instead, because I had the detergent in them. And yeah, in the end it looks sort of cartoonishly fun, but maybe not sort of super realistic awesome. But hey, who knows what the world looks like in 1995. And so now there's going to be some in a way tedious painting process. It's not really tedious. It was really fun to paint this car. And I thought I would talk about that while you look at what I'm doing, instead of me just explaining every step, because all these steps are kind of basic. One of the biggest reasons why I wanted to paint this car is because it's not like anything else that I'm working on at the moment. I play mainly, well, not even very often, but paint mainly Age of Sigmar miniatures, fantasy. I'm currently working on a new Stormcast army that I thought was going to be fast, but it's not, and I'm letting it take its time. And getting the opportunity to just paint something completely different in not even a color scheme of my choice. Someone told me, you have to, it's supposed to be sort of, inspired by this and do your best. Was just really fun. And I would really like to recommend that every now and again, say if you only paint 40K, like try painting something that's not futuristic, maybe a Roman soldier or like the torso of a senator or, whatever you can find. Build something. Just when things start getting a bit tedious on what you're doing, just to get to paint something where you can just drop all the other stuff and just experiment, paint with paints you've never painted with before, like pink. I really like pink. I think like that's, you know, if I was going to be painting all these Indominus boxed necrons, I think, you know, I would make them pink, because I figure that leg looks really nice. But anyway, there's just so much stuff, and just painting something in a different scale is really interesting, like be it larger or be it smaller. I don't think I can emphasize enough how fun I had working on this car, and how much more fun my painting my Stormcast army has been afterwards, because I just did this little thing. I felt like I completed it. I got to do all, you know, nothing repetitional at all, just some solid fun painting. And it really made me realize once more why I really like this hobby, and why, yeah. So please, if you're tired of whatever it is you're working on, if there's too many miniatures in a row, if you're just bored with the genre in general or whatever, doesn't mean that you have to just step out of it and completely change direction. You can just pick up the one mini, or if you got a 3D printer or a friend with a 3D printer or whatever, just print something completely different. It could be a tree, anything, and just drop what you're doing, paint something different. It doesn't even have to be great. You can just experiment, and it might end up something you throw in the trash. But it's just so liberating to do something fresh every now and again. And I think it's going to be a reoccurring theme of me maybe now and again releasing a video of me painting something that is not usually what I paint, because I enjoyed this one so much. But now back to the diorama. I want to show you this because it's one of my favorite ways of painting like terrain, or whatever you want to call it. And that's making sure you're getting the most out of this zenithal prime as you can. Is basically watering down paints a lot. And I'm talking a lot, like 50-50 water pretty much. The good thing in this case is if you're using and I don't want to sound like a nerd, because we're all in this together. But if you have a pretty high quality paint, like the scale 75 paints that I've been using, means you can water them down quite a lot without them sort of separating or behaving weirdly. They just sort of become a very thin paint. But what I do is I thin it down with a lot of water. And so in this case, I used a brown. I think it's called a Gobi brown, sort of a desert themed brown, for the desert floor. And when you use a thin paint like this, it doesn't hold its saturation very well. Like the color isn't very strong, but you still retain the depth from the zenithal priming, i.e. it still sort of looks like it's sort of darker in the shadows and brighter up top. You just change the tone of it. And usually, in my case at least, like terrain and stuff like that doesn't really have to pop everywhere. Like sand doesn't have to scream yellow at you. It can be sort of a bit more mellow. With the mountain or the hill, I used 3 colors. I used a very, very, very dark gray and sort of an orange called Kalahari orange, I think. So it's still sort of desert inspired, and a blue, because a mountain, at least, you know, it's kind of sci-fi, but usually a hill or a mountain isn't just the one gray. And so I'm using a blue to get sort of cooler shadows. I'm using the gray to get more of a neutral kind of a gray, and then sort of like a rust, you know, because there could be iron ore in the stone, so you get sort of a warmer, rusty kind of a look from the orange paint. These are watered down tremendously as well. But in this case, I do sort of like a wet blend. Now, a wet blend is when you use several paints at the same time and you mix them on whatever you're painting while they're still wet. A case like this is a really great way, if you haven't tried wet blending, to start, because it's a big surface. There's no details. You can, you know, nothing bad will happen if you get some blue where you had the orange or whatever. It just looks even better. And so I'm just sort of freebasing and going, oh, this looks a bit nice in blue, and then some gray, and then some red. And when this dries, I mean, you could almost, I didn't actually do any, I did some, you'll see some dry brushing later on the hill, but this is it for the hill. It's just a zenithal prime, and then getting some color tones in there from these sort of the blue and the orange, and darken it down a little bit with a gray wherever I think it wants to be a little bit darker. With the desert, on the other hand, the sand is, I'm not going to say it's more tricky, but usually like sand, you know, I only had the one paint on there, and sand is not, you want some more different types of tones in. So first I went in with this sort of a darker brown, where enhancing the shadows, and then a more of a yellow with sort of like I call it a wet dry brush. It's sort of the sort of technique of dry brushing, but you actually have a bit more paint on the brush than if you dry brush. You know, when you dry brush, you dip your brush in paint and then wipe most of it off on a piece of paper, so there's hardly anything left, and then you rub it around and it just sticks on everything that sort of sticks out. Sort of that kind of thing, only I don't rub that much on the paper, and then I just pull it sort of very lightly over on top, and this is to sort of get more paint and more color in there. And after that I did more of a normal sort of dry brush, I guess, with an even brighter yellow, getting sort of, so I get a lot of different sort of sand tones into this desert. Now there's a paint range, a set of paints from Green Stuff World, which is called liquid pigments. I made a video about them. I keep on mentioning these paints because I really, really enjoy working with them. And with the mountain, what I did is they've got one called white dust. I dry brushed with the white dust. The thing is, when you sort of dry brush with these liquid pigments, is you can still have it fairly sort of a fairly wet brush, and not getting sort of an overexcited dry brush. It's not like every little crack just sort of shines white all of a sudden. It's very forgiving, but at the same time you don't get that sort of, I don't mind dry brushing at all, but sometimes when you dry brush you get this sort of dry feel, like you're rubbing around dry paint on something, and it's sort of, it's almost like it's a little bit fuzzy. You don't get that with, I don't get that at least with these liquid pigments. So I dry brushed the hill with the white, and also the concrete, which by the way I painted with just a sort of neutral gray before, and just gave the edges a bit of a white. And I really like this. I then used another liquid pigment called sort of medium dust or dark dust, one of them, they're gray anyway, and did the same thing on the concrete road, not concrete, asphalt road, very lightly, just to get the sort of little bumps. And then I went in with the brush, just some places where I wanted to actually enhance the cracks, which are almost black, so I enhanced the edges of them with the gray on a brush, so that, you know, by making the highlights a bit lighter, the cracks will be perceived darker. It's like paint science. And then I figured there should be yellow lines on the edges of the roads, and I have this tape. It's like when you're supposed to be painting, masking tape, it's called. And it's the super, super delicate masking tape, which sometimes works great on flatter areas because it sort of sticks, but it also doesn't sort of rip things off when it comes off. In this case, on the road, because I took a strip out like this to make two thin lines on the road, and it didn't stick at all. So I should have had a bit more of a powerful tape, I guess. But the technique is to use tape to get two really thin lines, and then sort of stipple or dry brush / stipple some yellow on there, and voila, you're supposed to have a road. Only my pieces of tape were moving around, so I sort of had to paint it a little bit with a brush afterwards as well. I realized I forgot to say something a bit about the diorama when I was building it, and I was putting on pieces of cork. Like, this is what I forgot to say when I was finishing it off, because I think I rambled on into something else. I put some small pieces of cork and cork bark for larger rocks. I put some kitty litter, because nowadays I have a cat, for sort of medium-sized rocks, and then sand for really small rocks. And I also here and there put some crackle paint. This is called Mojave mud crack. Sort of by the edge where the water is, I figured, you know, it should have cracked a little bit up the top of the mountain where maybe a lot of sort of rain pours and has poured, you know, before the apocalypse and whatever. And yeah, it's great stuff. You should crackle paint. It's on my list. I made a video of like 21 things that I use a lot, and this is one of the things that are on there. Now back to, I was talking about the liquid pigments. I used the same, there's a rust set as well that I used for the pipe and the little details on the where the goo's going to come out, the sewage or whatever, nuclear waste sewage. And it's basically, it's a little bit of a procedure. You use, there's, you know, a dark rust, a medium rust, a light rust, and then an orange. And in the end, I tend to just try and get as much of the dark rust on there, and then the rest I sort of stipple on, the medium and the light, and then the orange I paint with the brush so I get it exactly where I want it. And in the end, it's just such a great rust effect. And once more, it's in the video about the liquid pigments I was talking about before. And then the last thing before varnishing is basically some dry pigments. There's a one from MIG called Dry Mud, and a little bit here and there of a ochre rojo, dark red ochre. Just here and there, mainly this light one, just to get sort of some stains on the road and stuff like that, just some dust. And then it was all ready to varnish. And so I varnished it. I actually tried something different with varnishing this time. I'll talk about it just because, you know, I tend to talk. I used a matte varnish through my airbrush from Vallejo that polyurethane matte varnish. And it wasn't really all that matte. So after that, I dusted it really lightly. I've got another Vallejo acrylic matte varnish on a rattle can, and I just dusted it lightly with that just to sort of matte things down, sort of tending to avoid where there was going to be a water feature. Now with the water feature, you know, I figured it's just one thing too many for this video. And so next week's video is going to be about how I did this water feature, and also some examples of other water features. So if you're watching this way after this video has been published, that's how you make the water feature. For you guys that are watching this just when it is published, sorry, you're just gonna have to wait a week for the water feature. But this is what it looks like. I mean, what I was going for was some kind of sci-fi sewage, and sci-fi sewage should be kind of neon-y green. And then it was just a matter of gluing this all into the frame. By the way, through the entire build, I just constantly made sure that this thing would fit into the frame, which is, if you're, you know, looking at this, trying to do something with the frame like I've been doing, make sure, you know, you don't complete the whole thing. Yeah. And I used white glue on the inside and left it upside down to dry, and then I covered the back of it with hot glue just to make sure. And then we were done. And this is what it looks like. Oops. It's tiny, isn't it? It's so small, but it is kind of magnetized. It is magnetized. It sticks there sort of, but I mean, basically the car's a little bit heavy with all the extra exhausts and stuff on it. And also I covered this magnet up with like a double layer of of road, but I mean, it does the trick. And lovely little water feature, mountain and everything. Now here's a cool thing. I'm saving the best bit for last. Let's just do that. And I don't know if you can see all that well, but this is the neon-y water shining. And here is the fluorescent pink. That's kind of sci-fi, isn't it? Yeah. So if Mr. Sci-Fi Wargaming has like a discotheque at home with like UV lights going, then this thing will be showing quite well. I thought that was kind of fun. So the mecha paint was not only pink, it would also sort of fluorescent pink. And there's some green fluorescent stuff in the water feature, which is just kind of a fun detail if you happen to be walking around with your little UV light. There we are. And I really want to advertise, because there's another 3 cars painted. And so Leif at Devs and Dice has got one, Maurice at SciFiWargaming has one, and Jamie at it just always sticks in my tongue, Miniocalypse. And he's been painting mine, and he's actually sent me, like, I don't want to say too much because you know, I haven't actually seen the video, but I've seen a picture and I really like what he's been doing. And there's also a surprise in like, it's got something to do with me as a person, only smaller. Yeah, that kind of ruined the surprise. But anyway, there will be links below in the description of each of the other channels and hopefully of the videos once they're released. And I urge you to just go check them out to see how the other cars turned out, and especially Jamie's, because he's painting my channel and we're supposed to be patriotic and everything, right? I hope you enjoyed this video. I sure enjoyed myself. Once again, please go out and, well, maybe not go out, especially not if it's raining, then preferably stay indoors, but paint something different every now and again. This was really just a super fun thing. Just trying all these little, like, stuff I haven't tried before. Like just this strange thing on the exhaust pipes and the fancy sort of trying to paint glass, sort of some kind of very simple non-metallic metal on the gun, and just the color choice of pink and white and the staining. Like, it's not stuff that I would have done on my Stormcast that I'm really happy about now, but I wasn't when I was painting this. And so yeah, please try painting something different every now and again. And once more, thanks for watching. Thanks for everyone who involves in this channel. I appreciate it. My patrons, all you people viewing and leaving comments. And, you know, if you're new to this channel, welcome. Please like, subscribe, tell your friends. Go paint something different.